What language learning methods are out there and what actually works? And is there a difference depending on the level you're at or the language you speak originally or, your age? Does any of that matter?
As teachers who have had more than 2 decades of teaching English and language learning experience, we do have thoughts on the matter. And unsurprisingly, the answer is complicated.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Waiguo Friends English. Today, we are finally getting down to kind of the nitty gritty of the basis of a lot of people's questions. When we have students ask us, what should I do? Or just random language learners just trying to say, hey, what are some ideas you have? What is the best method? What is the basis of your approach to language learning for yourselves? But as you teach your students, what is it?
And this is important because language is a timed game. And so if you don't get a good method, it feels like, then you're going to waste out on so much time because the thought is that the method determines how long it takes you to get to fluency, which is not exactly the case. We have experimented with several of these methods that we're going to talk about today, and all of them have their pros and cons. So we're going to talk through some of the major ones, and then at the end, give you kind of our 2 cents on the matter of where we stand as language teachers and language learners.
The first one everybody knows is the immersion method. This is where you basically pack your bags, you go and you live and work and study in the country that speaks your target language. And it sounds great, right? It
Yeah.
sounds like it should work because you're smothering yourself in the language.
You're there.
But the problem is you're not always actually using the language.
Sometimes people are so overwhelmed with language that either they become really skilled in one aspect of language because they're immersed at their work or they're immersed in their job or they're immersed in their home, that a lot of the other parts of their English get diminished. And the question really then becomes, are you being immersed? Just because you're living in a country, are you actually being immersed in the language? And if you are, it can also be a really hard road. The immersion method, if you're going to go really hardcore into it, it can be really difficult because for a long time, you're not going to understand the world around you. That's definitely an uphill climb, and it's a steep learning curve.
It's a hard one emotionally. You are treated like a language baby because all of a sudden you are a full thinking adult who can make your own decisions, except in a country where the people don't understand your native language. And so what happens is you go all the way back to square one and you have to get help for getting a cell phone set up or going to the doctor. You can use translator apps and such, but it's just not as effective. We have done this. We have been language babies in a country where we did not speak the language and the people did not speak our language. And for a solid 6 months there, we had no idea what was going on.
It was tough. It was lonely.
It was also very scary. Did the immersion method actually work well for us? No, actually it didn't. And we know many, 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 many foreign expats tend to just hole up in foreign expat communities and they end up using their more comfortable languages more often than they use the target language anyway. So this is not the best method, but it is the first one that comes to mind for most people.
Method number 2 is the direct method, where you basically take A and B and you assume that all A means B. All you really have to do is to learn the vocabulary words. That's the secret with the direct method. If I can get all of the vocabulary words that are in your language translated into my language, then I'll be fluent. And so it's heavy on vocabulary. There's not so much on the grammar. There's a little bit, most of the emphasis is just building that vocabulary out. Another problem with this one is time. So a lot of times people take the direct method when they're translating and they say, oh, I want to say this in my own language, so let me go word for word. The sentence order is wrong, or the grammatical pattern is a little strange, or the idiom that they're trying to translate definitely doesn't translate. The direct method has its pitfalls for sure.
We all start out as beginners learning a ton of vocabulary, right? So it seems amazing because you have success with it originally. But once you get beyond survival English, this method is a little less helpful. The next one that is also helpful for beginners, and especially children, is the total physical response method. This is where you are associating words with movement. So you are getting up, you are moving. If you're going to write something, you say, I am writing this letter right now, and this is what it says. Games like Simon Says, where somebody says, stand up, sit down, turn on the light, turn off the light. You go and you do those things. Again, this is fantastic as a beginner. It's wonderful for building strong neural connections to these words that are, again, survival English. It's very much monkey see, monkey do, and a reward basis. So if you get it right, then your meal came just as you ordered it or what you thought you ordered. It's great for that. But It's again very difficult to do at the advanced levels.
As an echo to this would be something along the lines of sign language. I love sign language, and the signs in sign language are a way that you can actually bolster your TPR to kind of bring it further into the advanced levels. It's still not going to bring you all the way to fluent. So TPR is really useful for a time, but sooner or later you start kind of leaving that method behind.
The next one is the communicative language method. This one's great because it's all focused on real life things. You're not going to be learning words and terms and grammar that you don't need. You're just going to be focusing on what you're actually going to practically use at work, at school, in your daily life. So it goes beyond survival English. You're not going to be debating Socrates in the target language. You're not going to be going for mastery. You're not going to be going for skills that you don't necessarily need, like test skills, for example. You're going to be focusing primarily on what can I do at base, the fastest method possible is to communicate this order to this person, or to handle phone communication, or to handle whatever you need in daily life. This method has a lot of TPR associated with it. It has a lot of comprehensible input associated with it. So you're going to be just doing what is physically useful to you, what is actually useful to you, what is important for conversations, which is great. But again, you're not going to be going anywhere beyond. So if you are somebody who wants to go beyond just being able to hold conversations and get around daily life, then you're going to want to pursue another method beyond this, maybe perhaps after this level.
And another thing I would say for the communicative language teaching is that it's really intensive on the teacher. You can't do this in a classroom setting. You can't do this in big classes. You can't do this in courses. You have to really get one-on-one with people to say, where are you at in your life? And let's use those resources that you need to kind of advance your English in that direction. It's very micro in terms of language skills. So how can I land that deal? How can I land that sale? How can I go over here? How can I get a visa? And so you get really good information based on that one aspect of language, but the other aspects kind of fall by the wayside.
So somebody who doesn't need to write, but they need to be able to close sales calls, they're going to be using the communicative method to understand how to most accurately communicate this. I will say in class settings, when the communicative model is being used, you do a lot of role plays, like a lot. And it's difficult to get through a language learning class without some kind of role play. It's something where it's like the meat of it. So if you're not going to be following your teacher through the store and learning how to communicate about, can I have that kind of meat versus this kind of meat? Or what's the difference between this product and this product? If you're not going to be following your teacher around and doing it in a real world context, then you're going to be doing a lot of role play.
Another one that's kind of similar to the previous one is task-based language learning. So that means you kind of get a specific task. And the big thing about this is that you're not trying to have the art necessarily of communication. You're not trying to develop a deeper way or a better way, a more creative way to do that thing, to get a visa or something like that.
Or even multiple ways
Yes.
to get to one thing. You're just trying to get straight to the results.
Task-based is a yes or no, true or false, you did it or you didn't do it kind of method, which makes it extremely measurable. Can you get a visa? Yes or no. Can you order checks from your bank in English? Yes or no. But just like the previous method, this is even more narrowly focused. So can I do that thing? Yes or no. Can I pass that test? Yes or no. And so you have to have a list of tasks that can kind of be difficult to review. It's like if I order checks from my bank, great, I've ordered checks from my bank. Now I don't have to do that anymore, except for when I do, then I have to go back to the same task-based learning system of saying, now I need to remember how I did checks again because it's been so long since I did order checks. That could be one downside of task-based language learning.
Another downside is that you end up memorizing a lot of templates for this one. For example, if you're studying for a test, then you have 60 seconds to give a response to a prompt that was just given, or to an article you just read, or something you just listened to. In 60 seconds, you have to make your most efficient response that ties in with many keywords. It's a lot. It's a lot, and it's not very realistic. Nobody's going to be sitting there saying, you have 60 seconds to respond to me. Right? Nobody's going to be doing that. So the task-based model is great for getting from point A to point B, but it's not exactly real-life language.
The next way is called the natural approach, which is basically you just try to acquire, and through mimicking and through repetition, through people around you, you try to basically attach yourself and make yourself a copy of a person, but not silently. You are participating. But the problem with this is that the errors that you find there could actually happen in the way that you're doing it. So, for example, we knew a lot of teachers that were abroad that were not native speakers in English, which is totally fine. They were either from the native country that we were in or from other countries that came over and were teaching English to like kindergartners. That's okay, except that if you use the natural approach, you're taking a copy, and that copy could have some errors. And so the natural approach necessitates that you find a really solid point or points of input from the target language for you to grow quickly. But again, a lot of times we grow when we have a lot of different inputs, a lot of variety of inputs. And that's really hard to do if you're going to study using the natural approach.
You want to find native speakers ideally for this one so that you can mimic the right thing, mimic the original, if you will. This approach is based off of how kids learn language, which is great because kids, they mimic, right? They learn primarily through listening and then they mimic those things. And when they get a positive reinforcement, great, they've got it, they can move on. This method is a good method to use. It's a good method to have, but it's not something that you want to fixate on and base all of your language on later on. Also, this method really cranks down on grammar learning. So you're going to be reinforcing habits. You're going to be using comprehensible input. You're going to be focusing on habit patterns, sentence patterns, phrase patterns, but you're going to be learning those not by breaking them down into their parts, like the grammar translation method, but you're going to be focusing primarily on how would you say this? Oh, okay, you would say this. The problem with this method is when you get higher up and you realize, oh, there's another way and another way and another way, and I don't understand how that works. Or you really want to get into writing and you want to understand the many different ways you can write and which one has more weight versus another, which one's more simple versus another, how to write with such variance that it's interesting. There's a lot of different things that could be a problem here. But again, as a base level or as an intermediate level, it's actually not that bad.
I think of like the phrase that you're going to hear a lot using the natural approach is we don't say it like that. We say it like this.
Yes.
And then they leave it at that. There's not a deep explanation of this is why we use this form of the adjective, or this is why we use this weird plural form of that noun. There's none of that. It's just, we don't say that. We say this.
Which can be frustrating. And I remember I transitioned into this method with Mandarin when I was learning it in country. And it was very frustrating because one person would say, you said it wrong. That's not how we say it this way. But another person from another part of the country would say, no, we don't say it that way. This is the way we say it. And then somebody who thinks foreigners should learn the textbook Mandarin would look at me and say, no, that's not how we say it. We say it this way. So again, 3 native speakers telling me completely different things. And so this approach is great, especially if you have 1 or 2 people to follow on. But eventually you've got to be able to open up and be able to accept other ways of doing things and recognize that, oh, from this region, they say this. From this region, this is more clear. And it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's just in those particular contexts, I was struggling with what is the most appropriate thing I can say in this context. And I was getting 3 different answers.
Another method is called community language learning, which is when people get together that all have the same goal and they say, you know what, we're going to make an English corner. We're going to get together. We're going to establish a community where this is the place where we want to learn the target language.
One of the most popular ways we see this nowadays is with memberships or membership programs. Because what you do is you have a community of like-minded people aiming for the same language together, which is great. And then you have some kind of expert or teacher who is your guide. And so you have these exercises, you have this instruction, but then you work on practicing together. You have plenty of opportunities to practice, again, with non-native speakers for the most part, or sometimes there's something built in where you do have native teachers or native speakers that come in and mix with the group. But generally speaking, you're working with mostly non-native speakers to complete the tasks that the teacher has given or complete the tasks within the curriculum. Now, this is a really great method for having accountability, for having motivation, for having plenty of practice. But one of the downsides is like, yeah, maybe you can get off base or you could be practicing and repeating the same mistake over and over again until it becomes hardwired for you. You don't realize it's a mistake. Or maybe your partner or the people that you tend to practice with are speakers of your own native language. And so you all kind of have the same mistake and you're mimicking it, but you don't realize it yet. Ideally, in this case, you would have a smaller community to work with. You don't necessarily want to get into a group where you are practicing with hundreds of other people. That sounds great in terms of practice, and that is good for practice. But if you don't have a teacher coming in and checking and working with you and identifying those issues, giving you feedback, then you're not going to know what you're repeating. On the one hand, the goal is communication. On the other hand, if accuracy really matters to you, or if you're trying to train for a job, especially phone calls or management, you definitely want to get to where you are practicing communicating effectively, and that requires lots of feedback in this model.
And frankly, this approach is very difficult to find done well because there's so much flexibility. You know, the group themselves have an impact on how the teaching and the learning happens. So there's always going to be one of those people, you know who I'm talking about, who always tries to take more of the class time or make it about their language because they have needs too. And so that can be really difficult to manage. And so that's where that teacher comes in. So he says, hey, let's rein it back. Hey, you go over here, let's split some groups up. And that can be a really challenging thing to manage when you have a lot of people.
But the pro of this is that this tends to be one of the cheaper methods to do because it's a group model. Related to the natural approach is the silent way, which comes before the natural approach, really. It's based off the whole idea that a baby to a toddler, they are quiet. They just babble. They experiment with pronunciation, but they're mostly just listening and taking in all this language and these patterns and the facial expression, the body language. They're learning all of these things so that when they start to open their mouths and actually speak, it seems like they're learning to speak quickly, but really they've been learning since they were born, even before they were born. If you want to take when they start to be able to hear the mother from inside the womb. In this method, in a class like this, the teacher actually remains silent. He or she provides tasks for you to accomplish or for you to do. And you work through trying to do those things in the target language without very much help from your teacher. But the teacher is there for guidance just in case. But it's a lot of trying to figure it out on your own in the target language. So think of Montessori education, if you know this, where you have a bunch of building blocks and the goal is build a tower. The rule is you can only speak the target language. That's what you're going to be doing. And there might also be times where the teacher does some speaking and works on a task, talking about what's being done, and that gives you comprehensible input to be listening. I hear what she said there. She's saying, oh, this block, we set it up vertical. Vertical is a word for this. There's a lot of observation with this one, but then there's a lot of actually doing as well. It is a very efficient method, especially in the beginning. And you can tell that it kind of brings in a little bit of TPR or total physical response. It definitely evolves into the natural approach quite a bit. There's a lot of communicative method involved and a bit of community language learning if it's done in a group setting quite well and quite regularly.
However, one of the things that you're going to hear a lot with this method is simply the teacher asking questions or giving the tasks. They're not necessarily going to provide you the correct answers, but sometimes there is a correct answer. There is a better way or the proper way to build a bridge. You can't just say, we're going to just experiment and see today, class. And the teacher sits down and then everybody else is like, well, what are we going to do? Where are the materials? How are we? And the teacher is just sitting over there like, no, go build a bridge. It can be a problem, not necessarily because the students aren't competent enough, but because the teacher has to give additional sources of information so that students can have that as a means, use that comprehensible input as a means to do things. And so something that can be difficult for students who don't want to necessarily say, I want to figure things out. I want to be in a more authoritative role. It's like, I want to come to class, please. I don't want to be the teacher, please. Then those kind of students could really struggle in that kind of setting where the responsibility is placed on top of them.
Yeah, and some teachers can do this really well, like really, really well. But sometimes this isn't done well, and it can lead to a lot of frustration. It could lead to burnout very quickly if everything you're doing is just a hard task, and you feel like there's a wise sage over there who could help you, but they're not willing to. Or they'll only give you answers like an oracle would. It's tricky. It's difficult sometimes. It is frustrating to be in it. I have been in this situation before. It is very frustrating, but it's something that if you have the right temperament and the teacher is more willing to help, if you really do need the help and they can identify that well without just giving you the answers, it can be an enjoyable experience.
One of the last methods that we're going to talk about today is content-based learning. This is really advantageous for people that are already working or living in an English-speaking country because you take specific areas, specific topics, specific worlds, specific contexts, and use that as a basis of you to learn the language. So let's say you're doing programming, and let's say you use programming as a vehicle for you to learn English. Let's say you're an engineer, so you're building those bridges, but you're using the bridge building process, the designing process, as a bridge, get it, to learn English. These are really helpful because you're doing something you're already interested in. You're doing something you're already invested in, and you're using that as a vehicle to study the language. But I hope by now you've already seen that there are some fallbacks with each approach, and this one is no exception because it can be really difficult to learn the outside parts of language that are not bridge related, that are not programming related, that are not dentistry related, if you just use that vehicle to study the language.
The last method we'll talk about today, and it's number 10, oddly enough, is the grammar translation method. And this is the one we're all very familiar with. Many of us come through school systems that encourage us to do this. I have years invested in this method that I wish I hadn't spent. Because honestly, when you have a grammar translation method, you're studying grammar, you're memorizing vocabulary, and you're practicing with translating small texts or small audios. And that seems great. It feels very productive because you can have a checklist of things. You could see the homework that's done. You have these beautiful notebooks and notes written out and all these things. But at the very heart of it is debating the actual translation of something, which can be exciting with a dead language. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty exciting to, I don't know, biblical texts from Greek or Hebrew, for example, where it's like, oh, did the author mean this or this? And what are the implications or the consequences of which method it means? We can get into a grammar debate about that. That's great. If you're minded that way, if you're trying to just speak Mandarin well enough to travel the country with ease, that's not what you need. This is one of the longer ways to go. And honestly, everybody that I've met that has done the grammar translation method has forgotten it very quickly because the discipline it takes to keep up the learning in this way is repetition. And you're honestly not going to study and write papers and break down translations and debate things. You're not going to be doing that when you actually move into actually speaking the language. You're going to stick to the things that you practice every day, which is speaking the language or writing if it is involved in your job. You're not going to be debating with yourself whether this translation is more accurate than this translation, unless you are a translator.
Obviously heavy on grammar, obviously heavy on translation. And a big problem is that in the living languages, when a person's face to face with you, you actually have a lot more information than just the grammar. You have the paralanguage, you have the body language, you have the tone of voice, you have the pitch, you have the speed, you have the distance between each other. There's a lot more information that allows you to understand and to be understood than simply the words themselves and the grammar that's being spoken.
By far the biggest problem with the grammar translation method is it encourages you to listen to the target language, translate it in your head to understand what's going on, form the response in your language, and then translate it back into the target language to communicate it back. And it's slow, it's clunky, and it's really difficult. It kind of gets you stuck, especially if you tend to be a perfectionist. It really makes you stuck and makes you not really want to say much.
The question that a lot of people face with this is, will I become fluent with any of these methods? Can I pick any? Can I just choose my pick and it's anything's good, anything's okay?
The honest truth is, with time, consistency, and dedication, you could get through intermediate or get to high intermediate pretty easily with most of them as well. Again, with time, dedication, and effort, some people will go faster with some versus others. But your personality plays into this. The time that you have, your dedication, your motivation level, the input that you have. How much comprehensible input do you really have? Your history with English already. Is your goal realistic? Your learning style and your language background. How close is your original language to English? Like, is this going to be easy? Have you studied a language like it before, or is this completely different? There's going to be a lot to it. Also, ultimately, what you're going for really matters as well. Are you trying to become fluent? Are you going for mastery? Or are you just trying to get around so you could travel a little easier, not rely on an internet connection and an app? What are you going for? There's a lot to be said there with that.
We've done a video recently talking about the 80-20 rule, and that is because a lot of the progress that you feel like is happening, you feel like it's 80% of your journey is over when you get to intermediate because you've nailed those vocabulary words, you have the grammar, you are progressing forward, but the fact is that it's the exact opposite. Actually, 80% of your journey is left. That speed that you've been picking up, that the fluency that you've been feeling in the upper intermediate levels is going to slow way down because you're going to realize, man, there's so many more areas and contexts and ways and things that I don't know how to do. And there's so much more nuances than I ever thought possible. And so this plays a key role into which method you're using, but also how long it's going to take you.
Sometimes people ask us, should I just pick a method and stick with it? Or pick two of my favorite methods and stick with them? You can do that. The thing is you can create the most beautiful blended program of all these different methods, and you can shift it at just the right times in order to work your way up in English. But if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it. If you have zero motivation, you're just not going to do it. So you need to find something that you enjoy. You need to have a goal. You need to have a realistic, measurable goal. We have a video about that here with a sheet for you to download to help you with that. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it. So you definitely need to stick through. The only thing that's going to get you through this grueling process of learning a language is actually enjoying the process.
And I would say also interacting with your current life setting. So if you have the ability to have a lot of task-based learning because you're heavy into your career right now, utilize that. But if you are not in that area, if you're just kind of trying to learn English for fun or to be able to communicate better to your child's teachers or something like that, then using task-based learning would be really challenging to do. Of like, I'm going to learn this thing, I'm going to learn what academics are in English, and then still not being able to communicate very effectively to your child's teachers. So that's a big thing, is just looking around, seeing where you are right now.
Choose something that fits you right now. There is no magic method. Some people ask, like, what is the way? How am I going to do it? I was doing what my friend is doing and she's already fluent. She was been fluent for 2 years and I'm on year 6 and I'm still not fluent. It doesn't work like that. It's different for everybody. Josh can literally breathe the air of the target language speakers and somehow speak. That's not exactly true, but he comes by language far easier than I do. I have to do a lot more of the writing element, because if I don't see it, if I don't actually move and work with it, then I'm not going to get it. So for him, like, a natural approach would do far more for him than it did for me, which is funny because I was the one who experimented with the natural approach. And though I got an ear for the language, I was not able to match what I was hearing to what the words were and what the terms were, because I am somebody who, when I speak, I actually see the words. So as I speak, in my mind's eye, I see the words in English writing as they go by. It sounds crazy. There's not a lot of people I've met that can do this, but I tend to do it. For me, though, the natural approach was not helpful because I didn't have a visual of the words I was hearing. So for me, it was actually a terrible idea to try this, even though I gave it a good 2 years. It was a terrible idea for me to do it that way. Josh actually did more of the method that I probably should have done, and he should have done more of the natural approach. It would have done better.
And also, it depends on what you define as what works, right? I think a big thing is that some people are like, what works? Meaning, did I get the job? What works? Meaning, did I get that promotion? What works is, am I being understood by my colleague? Am I comfortable? This problem that we have is also how we define fluency. What is it? And how do we get there? And for me, one of the things that's a big realization is that there are parts of language that are more obvious than other parts. So like Amber, her understanding of Mandarin words was much deeper than mine. I could just use them. And so it looked like from the outside that I knew more Mandarin than she did, but that wasn't the case. We knew about the same, except for that my part of the language was more overt and her part of the language was more under the radar. And so people sometimes would look at her and be like, can she speak or not? And it's like, that's not the point. What works is that she is learning language. What works is that I'm learning language. And so for you guys, we highly encourage you, obviously, experiment with all of these methods. If you are in a stage of your life now where you can utilize some TPR because you have young kids growing up, now you're trying to teach them English, do it, utilize it. But likewise, if you are in a workplace where you have a little bit more freedom and a little bit more leeway to participate in language and be kind of more of the active role in it, then use another method that's good for your current setting, because that is the key. It's not a sprint. You're not trying to get there as fast as possible. You're trying to stick with it, because frankly, most people, they don't become fluent because they just give up before they even get there. So the thing that you need to focus on is not what's the fastest method, but rather, what is the method or methods that's going to help me to stay consistent and stay in the game when others drop out?
And having that accountability is key, because language learning is grueling and it's hard on the days where you just had a really hard week and the kids are going nuts. Everybody's sick with the flu. It's hard to want to actually listen to some English for a little bit to practice. But if you have that accountability, you're answering to somebody, you are more likely to do it. Not just what you feel like, oh, I feel like doing my English today, but I have to do it because I have to see somebody and tell them that I did it today. That is a really healthy thing to have in any kind of discipline.
Well, guys, this was a massive video, but we have this question a lot. We've had this question a lot as language learners. And so we wanted to share it with you guys because we know how valuable it can be to be in that setting to say, what do I do now? What do I do next? And so we hope this video is helpful. And the big key is always, always, always just get out there and just start learning English. Just get out there and start using it. Whatever method that works for you, let's get to it.
That's it, guys. Thank you so much. We'll catch you on the next one.